Okay. And the stream is connected. Can I get a quick sound test from you?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All right. Gotcha. All right. We are recording. And let's see. Okay. Let me light this candle. Recording. Okay.
Support for Wrong About Everything comes from Minnesota's credit unions. Credit unions are locally based, member-owned financial cooperatives that return earnings to members through higher savings rates, lower loan rates, and reduced fees. Visit mncun.org for more information.
And welcome back to another episode of Wrong About Everything. I am Democratic strategist, the Puerto Rican Heat, and I am it. I'm not going to say I'm wrong about everything because the whole premise of this show is that each side thinks the other's wrong, but I'm alone, so I am right about everything today, or I'm correct about everything. I am left about everything and correct about everything. Today, so the Republicans. This is not a coup. This is not an insurrection. The Republicans all had a work trip this week because, as you know, they all work at the same place, and we were gonna just skip this week, and then all the stuff that happened in California with ICE happened, and so I decided to just do something a little different this week. So you're just going to be hearing from me. So if you're one of the people who does not tune in because of me, and you know, if you're one of our more right-leaning people, like, just fair warning, is just me. Turn it off now.
Be a good time to turn it off.
And if you're one of the people who turns it on because of me, like, you're in luck. You're getting a lot of me today.
It's like a party, right?
Yeah, it's like a party. So that's Gabe in our booth, as always, our producer. And today we'll be chatting more with me because there won't be three other people jumping in. So first of all, welcome as always to the Minnesota Credit Union Network studio within the depths of MBC Studios in Minneapolis. And as always, we thank and ask you to support it when you need criminal attorneys. Our sponsor, Bradshaw & Bryant. Their entire team of attorneys and staff is dedicated to providing the legal advice you need, combined with the service and personal attention you deserve. If you have questions about how they can assist you with a personal injury, wrongful death, or criminal defense matter, do not hesitate to contact them. Consultations are free. You can call them at 800-770-7008 or reach them at minnesotapersonalinjury.com. So this, I will say, I've just kind of been numb and very sad. Very angry, but mostly very sad since Friday when Friday afternoon, a friend was visiting and I got a message on my phone, and I looked at it, and it was a link to a social media post that had video of my friend and former colleague, David Huerta, the president of SEIU, United Service Workers West, in California, and the president of SEIU California, the umbrella union. David is a friend. People who've listened to this podcast know, I was president of Local 26 of the Service Employees Union here in Minnesota. The statewide, we are a union of janitors, security officers, and other service workers in Minnesota, principally in the 7-county metro area. I stepped down from that role in 2019, but the union remains dear to my heart. I will always bleed purple, and the union colors are purple and yellow, like the Vikings colors. And so everyone in the labor movement knows SEIU for wearing purple, and I bleed purple. And so on Friday, I saw my friend David getting punched in the face by ICE and kicked once he fell to the ground, and then detained. He was taken to an emergency room, and then after he was treated there, he was held in detention. He was released on Monday on $50,000 bail. That's video, that is, if you're watching on YouTube, of when they arrested David. It's hard to watch, sorry. And what David was doing and what other SEIU members were doing and what community members were doing on Friday was that there was word that a raid was happening, a workplace raid. And as happens all over the country, as happens here in Minnesota, as happened here on Lake Street last week, because there has been a promise of mass deportations, including mobilizing the military. I'll get to that in a bit, because they're fulfilling that promise now. Because there has been a promise of that, and because people like myself and many others in this country understand that our immigration system has been broken. So we have entire sectors of our economy that depend on immigrant labor, but yet immigrants are demonized. And because there has been this promise that there will be military-style raids and such, people come out. People come out to watch, to observe, to photograph, which is our right, to protest, which is our right. And that's when they punched him in the face. And as you can see, he's off to the side, not obstructing anything. Then they took him away. And then since then, I'm sure you've seen the news. If you know folks in Los Angeles, you could maybe give them a call, because one of the things that's happening in like the media representation, and if to hear Pete Hegseth, to hear Donald Trump, to hear Speaker Mike Johnson, you would think that LA was bursting in flames. This is actually the city. Most parts of the city don't even know what's going on. Because these are peaceful protests for the most part. And as always happens in any protest, there are some people who go overboard, and there's a difference between daytime and nighttime, which is, but they've been overwhelmingly peaceful. There've been nothing that the state couldn't control. But there were protests, and a lot of the premise of what seems to be happening is that just people protesting is a reason for police to come out and shoot bullets. Just people protesting is a reason to mobilize National Guard. Just people protesting is a reason for there to be violence. This country was founded on some principles, including free speech and the right to protest. The right to protest. The fact of a protest in and of itself is no reason. This is not the Rodney King riots. This isn't anything close to that. But as I said, you're going to hear only me today. And so I thought I would share with our listeners my experience being the president of a union of janitors, overwhelmingly immigrant, many of them undocumented, and what it was like when I and we dealt with ICE directly here in Minnesota. To give you a sense of immigration's customs enforcement and their interactions with community. So in 2008, Barack Obama was elected, and my union, SEIU, worked very hard to get Barack Obama elected. And one of the issues in his platform was, as has been for every Democratic candidate for now decades, is immigration reform, was fixing our broken immigration system. And For years in Congress, there has been agreement that we have a broken system, and there used to be bipartisan agreement that the way you fix that was you'd have both strong enforcement, but also legalization for what at the time 11 million people living in the country without papers. That you do both. That one happens, that they should happen in tandem. What has happened over the years is that Democrats have fallen for the trap over and over again that we keep conceding on enforcement and getting nothing on legalization. And so Democrats and Republicans have agreed over and over to keep increasing the budget of Homeland Security, the budget of ICE. If you do any research into budgets, it's one of the most non-transparent budgets. We have no idea how the money is spent or anything like that when it comes to ICE. But Democrats have agreed on that. And so when Obama came into office, there had been, during the Bush administration, some pretty dramatic workplace raids. There were some in southern Minnesota. There was one in Worthington at the meatpacking plant there. And there were these very dramatic military-style workplace raids. We're seeing them back now. And the Obama administration came in saying, we're not going to do that. So they were going to have a kinder, gentler version of immigration enforcement. And SEIU Local 26 was the first local union to experience what this supposedly kinder, gentler version of immigration enforcement was. And that was in the first week of June in 2009, so just 6 months into the Obama administration, I received notice from our largest employer that they had gotten a notification from Immigrations and Customs Enforcement of what is called a notice of suspect documents. So it turned out that some months before this employer ICE had showed up to this employer. They had not told us then when that had happened. Had showed up to this employer, taken all of their HR records. And so then months later, they came with this report and said the following people, there were 1,256 names on that notice of suspect documents. And I will never forget that number. 1,256 names, because there are 1,256 people. There are people that I knew, that I know, people working in the janitorial industry here, people who keep, these buildings where if you're an office worker in downtown Minneapolis or downtown St. Paul or Bloomington or along the 394 corridor. If an office worker in the afternoon makes some popcorn, goes to her desk and spills popcorn on the carpet, and then they go home at night, and then the next morning, magically, it's gone. It's not magical elves. Janitors who come in at night who you don't see, and whose name you may not know because you don't see them, they do that work. Their labor is invisible, but their labor is critical and their labor is important. And it's something in common that many industries that depend on the labor of immigrants, one of the things they have in common often is that labor is invisible to the rest of us. That's why I always say, if you're against illegal immigration, live by your values and boycott food. Because if you ate today, you benefited from the labor of immigrants, specifically of undocumented immigrants. So either make all your own food or join the fight to have a saner system.
What do you know about how they choose who they raid? Is it off tips or what?
It's a good question. It's not always clear. It's almost never clear. So in the 90s, it would often happen that employers who know what they're doing. Listen, there is not an employer in the United States. They know their legal obligation before the law is to look at documents when people apply for employment. Anyone who's had a job, who's applied for a job, you show your passport or your green card, whatever is to show that you are authorized to work. An employer is actually required by law to just see if on the face those documents look correct. They mark them, and that's that. But employers in all kinds of industries know that many times those documents are fake, and they go ahead and hire people because their industries depend on it. And so it used to happen that sometimes, like, an employer who's fully aware of who his or her employees are, for example, if their workers started to try to form a union, they would suddenly it used to be called INS, Immigration Naturalization Service.
Yeah.
And INS would show up in these spectacular raids. And so as a result of that, just wanton hypocrisy, there were Department of Labor guidelines put in place in Democratic administrations to say that that immigration's enforcement would not intervene in places where there were labor disputes happening, because it happens, Gabe, to answer your question, it happens in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it happens because people call their neighbors. There was a case just a week or two ago in Wisconsin where I think Kristi Noem had made a big deal about, there's an illegal immigrant who is threatened to murder Donald Trump. And scratch the surface of the case, they found out that actually what had happened is that a neighbor who was pissed off at this person wrote a letter pretending to be him, saying, I'm an illegal immigrant and I'm going to murder Donald Trump. Right. That kind of thing happens all the time. Mm-hmm. So back in 2009, when we got the notice of suspect documents, it was not clear what was going on. And I spoke with immigration attorneys across the country, and no one had heard of a worksite enforcement of that magnitude. It was the largest worksite enforcement that anyone had heard of. It was soon eclipsed by others, but we were in many ways guinea pigs. I think similar to the action last week on Lake Street, Minnesota used as guinea pigs for something bigger that was to come. So what the notice of suspect documents said required the employer is the employer then sends a letter to each one of those 1,256 people and says, we've gotten word from Immigration Customs Enforcement that there's a problem with your documents, and so you have to come in and re-register your documents. Bring in new documents. And they had to do it by, I think the letters, if I'm remembering correctly, and my memory maybe not 100% on this, but I think the letters people were getting them on a Friday, and they had to come in by Monday.
There's your blast from the past headline.
Yeah.
From 2009, yeah.
That is, yeah.
In quiet immigration raid.
Yeah. Yeah, and that news story happened in November of 2009, which was many months after I told you guys that it was in June that we first got notice. And let me explain why it was that long before there was a news story about this. Was that weekend, we immediately had very large member meetings, like hundreds and hundreds of people showing up, men, women, and children, and lots of children. Our membership is pretty young. So lots of young babies, little babies were around, and a lot of terrified people. And we decided collectively that we understood that until our laws are fixed, that what we could do was buy time. People were not being threatened with deportation. They were being told they could no longer be employed. So I got to work to try to buy time. We knew we had to buy time because that list was not entirely correct. There was at least one American citizen on it, and there were, in the end, turned out to be, I think, about 21, 22 people who had legal recourse that they did not know they had, but that as a result of this raid, and the time that we were able to buy, we got people legal representation, and there were 20 some or so families that escaped that fate. But
So like you're saying they didn't know, so they kind of lulled everyone into complacency that it's like, look, we're not going to kick you out, you just can't work. Is that what you're saying?
It was. I would say this was what I meant. Early when I said the kinder, gentler version of immigration enforcement. It was like, well, it's not a violent raid. We're not deporting them, but we're there. What they were saying is that they were holding the employers accountable. Now, the thing about holding the employers accountable on that is that I don't see how they held an employer accountable. There were 1,200 people who suffered a lot, so we had those member meetings. We sort of came to agreement, and we agreed that it was not in our best interests to make a lot of noise about this, especially while we tried to figure out, because when I say buy time, postpone, right? Ideally is postponed into forever, because this should just be why would we be any different than any other industry that depends on immigrant labor?
Right.
And so we didn't know what was possible. The following week, I think probably Monday, I flew to DC, and what the many millions of dollars and blood, sweat, and tears that SEIU members put into electing Barack Obama won us was access. So within a week, and actually it was the Friday following, I was in a meeting with the chief of staff of ICE in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And we explained the situation, and we explained that people were being given days to bring in new documentation. No one, even if you had any ability to do something, there was not enough. There was just simply not enough time, and it was causing chaos. And they were also, ICE's requirements were forcing the employer to break their contract with the union. So that was the premise of we immediately filed a class action grievance on behalf of all the members with this employer, and said that. Saying that you are violating our contract because we did not receive notice. They didn't notify us at any point that there was any issue. They didn't notify, and then people were not being given a reasonable amount of time to do what they were asking them to do.
Right.
ICE in DC said, the chief of staff of ICE told me, we don't give employers timelines. We don't say we just tell them you have a notice of suspect document. This is your notice of suspect documents, and so you have to notify people they have to fix this. But they can do that on whatever timeline they want. And I would say, well, the employer is saying that they ran this plan by ICE, and that ICE made them do it on this timeline. And the chief of staff of ICE looked me in the eye and said repeatedly, that is not our policy. We do not do that. So I came back and I told our employer this is what I'm hearing. And our employer, and I believed the employer, and we had, an acrimonious relationship at times, but like with any union relationship, you have an acrimonious relationship at bargaining, and then once you settle a contract, that's a union contractor, and you defend that contractor against non-union employers. And the reason I believed what they were saying is that they had no self-interest in doing it on this timeline. It was going to destroy their business. It was in their self-interest for me to be successful.
Right.
In my conversations with the Obama administration. So, what happened then for 3 weeks, this back and forth where ICE would say one thing to our employer, and I would talk to the people in DC, and they say, that's not our policy. Our policy is X. And I'd say, but ICE is saying here they have to do Y. And what I realized and what I understood, and I knew this by then having experience and seeing how ICE functioned across the country, but then saw firsthand that this is, in the best of times, an agency that is very, very rogue. And it was very clear, and it became clearer and clearer that what I came to understand and actually started to hear the frustration in the voices of the folks at Homeland Security is that they could not get their agents on the ground to implement their policy because ICE attracts a lot of people, frankly, who are cowboys, who are rogue. And I say all this to say that's ICE under a Democratic administration that had committed to passing immigration reform. ICE under a president who has for the last 10 years spewed nothing but vitriol against immigrants, is now completely it's no
He'll
hold
give him a
barred.
slap on the back.
Yeah,
Right.
there are no restrictions on them and on that. What ended up happening in that case, just to finish that story, was that at the end of those 3 weeks, I got a call from the chief of staff of ICE, and at that point, was really clear that there was going to be a finite amount of time. And she said, how much time do you all need? And at the time, there was a policy that Immigration and Customs Enforcement had, or that actually the Social Security Administration had, that for Social Security no matches, when an employer gets a letter from the Social Security Administration saying that the Social Security number that a person is using doesn't match their database because the person is undocumented, that number is fake. The policy is that the person has 90 days. So we were saying that if in the federal government 90 days is good for Social Security no match, which is a relatively easy thing to fix if you have a fixable problem, then certainly that should be at a minimum enough for much more complicated situations. So she said, what do you need? And I said, well, 90 days. And she said, okay, and hung up. Then I got a call from the employer, not long after, I remember. And the employer said, well, I don't know what you did, but we got a reprieve. And I want to tell this next part because it's a very important, it's the life lesson that I took from this. So we had another big member meeting. And we had agreed collectively that we would not have a big public fight about this because it was not in our best interest. We had agreed when it was in the abstract and hypothetically that the best we could hope for while our laws were broken was to buy time. And so when we were faced with people being fired within days, having won 90 days, to me, a Latino, but a Puerto Rican, someone with U.S. citizenship who has never lived the life of an undocumented person. I went before our members, and I went into that room as if I had good news to deliver. And I will never forget or live down the shame of announcing that we had a reprieve of 90 days, and then realizing immediately the mistake I had made in my tone, because what was coming back to me were faces, and then finally people spoke up and said, "So that's it? So we're not going to fight? We're just going to get fired?" We had made a collective decision, but I was the leader of that union. And it was a decision that I didn't just agree with, but that I encouraged. And after that, in the months and years after that, because that wasn't the only one, that was just the first one that happened. And by the time the third one happened, I had what I guess I would call a nervous breakdown. I had to take a leave from work because I was and remain so racked with guilt, because we were a union, the Local 26 in Minnesota, under my leadership. We doubled in size. We were known as a pretty damn loud union. Remember, there was a time that my staffer when our office was in the Minneapolis Regional, the same building as the other unions, and when one of the first actions that we did against an employer a building downtown that had gone non-union, and so we had a protest down there, and then the downtown buildings, almost all the other work there is done union construction and stuff, and so the roofers came to visit me, and they said they came to ask that we stop protesting that building because they have a good relationship with the owner. And I was like, well, are you offering to intercede with the ownership or something? Like, they weren't offering anything. They were just asking that we not protest. And then one of them said, I didn't even know the janitors had a union. And I said, really? How many members do you all have? And I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was like 400 or something like that. And I said, we have 4,000 members. Get the fuck out of my office. But it was a learning process for people in Minnesota to realize that the janitors in Minnesota had a union, because we set about making that invisible work visible. Remember my first contract campaign, when I was the first contracting negotiated for the janitor's contract, we started doing silent marches in the skyways because our contracts expired December 31st. That was the wisdom of my predecessors, to have a contract expire in the middle of winter in Minnesota. And we were never able to change the date because the employers knew it was in their best interest, because with the contract expires December 31st, you're on strike in the middle of freaking winter. And so we started doing marches and silent marches, and we thought we started them silent because that, then we couldn't be kicked out. And so we just had people in smocks and with signs and on their smocks. And they said, and it was on the holidays, it was after Thanksgiving was our first march, and people were in Santa hats, and the sign and their smock said, "Magical elves don't clean your offices, janitors with families do." We were trying to win family health care for the first time, and we did. we worked really hard to make the invisible labor of folks visible to the public. And so this really loud union was quiet. We didn't say anything. And that news story, that headline from Minnesota Public Radio, 1,200 janitors fired in quiet immigration raid. That happened in November of that year, much later, because when the rumors, eventually there were enough rumors that something like that had happened that the reporter worked on that story without our cooperation. Because in exchange for people having 90 days. And what I will say about those 90 days is that it gave us time to save, to get 20-some people relief under the law. And it gave people, the vast majority, the 1,256 people, gave them at least some time to find new work. Or
for people who don't know, like me, what is the route? So, if you're an immigrant, you've been working here for years, you get that letter. Is there any legal route for them to get, their citizenship in a short period of time like that?
For the vast majority of people, no.
Okay.
So it's an important thing that I'm glad you asked this question, because one of the things you hear often in immigration debates is, well, why don't they just get in line like everyone else and come in legally? There is no line for people to get in. The United States, last time I checked, and the laws have not changed since, so I don't expect it's any different. The United States authorizes 5,000 low-wage worker visas, or what they call unskilled workforce. Unskilled workforce visas a year. 5,000. That's not for a state. Huh? That's for the entire country. So that's why I can say with absolute certainty that if you ate today, you benefited from the labor of immigrants, because the agricultural industry across the country is held up on the backs of undocumented workers doing backbreaking work. And they do that without authorization. They do that illegally because we have entire industries that depend on them, that depend on informal recruitment from Mexico and Central America. The way it would often happen here was, as it is, that when one family member from a small town gets a job somewhere, then they start bringing their family members because there's work.
Same as we did in the turn of the century or whatever.
That is correct. Yeah, yes, exactly. That is correct. It's another myth that people will say was like, well, my family came legally. Actually, you should probably look into that, because the reality is, when the vast majority of European immigrants were coming in, there were either no laws, period. So there was no law regarding it, or in many cases were themselves also unauthorized and undocumented. It just wasn't a big deal because they eventually assimilated, and as we're saying today, it wasn't a big deal because many of them were white. The Europeans were all white. So the way I come to experiencing what happened this weekend is as someone who has seen ICE, has direct experience of how they behave when people are trying to control them. And now they are unleashed. And David Huerta, and the thousands of members of SEIU, USWW, are incredible human beings. Our union, our union SEIU was founded by Polish janitors in Chicago. Polish janitors who were not allowed to join the existing labor unions because their labor was denigrated, because their labor was seen as unskilled. And so they formed their own union. And our union was founded by European immigrants. And then in the 1970s and 80s, the industry, which by then was mostly, European immigrant and also African American, people used to work directly for buildings. So in downtown Minneapolis, like the IDS Tower or whatever, like they would hire people, and you would be an employee of that building. And then the industry started subcontracting. And when they subcontracted with the purpose of, one, it allows the building owner to say, they're not my employees.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
This is why we needed to be loud, because when we were sitting across the table from our employers, they are subcontractors. They don't sign the checks. They actually don't have a whole lot of power. They're little, they're nothing.
Right.
The people who have the power are the downtown building owners. But they're not at the table because they're not their employees. So we had to have big, loud campaigns because it was the only way the people who write the checks could feel the pain, could feel the crisis that our members would feel every day from being members of the working poor. And so that's why we had to be loud. But our industry, as it became subcontracted, also became non-union. And there was a point at which SEIU International, which by then had become also organizing healthcare workers and public sector workers, there was a time when SEIU almost abandoned organizing janitors at all, until there was a movement that was born called Justice for Janitors. One of the intellectual architects of it was a man named Stephen Lerner. He was my mentor in the union. But the heroes of it were the janitors of Los Angeles, who were overwhelmingly undocumented, and who many in the labor movement then said, and to this day still say, like that guy who the story I told about the guy saying I didn't know the janitors had a union. People obviously say, like, well, but like aren't immigrants who are undocumented, aren't they scared to join a union?
Right.
Because well, what I can tell you is that someone who makes a decision to leave their country to come to a country where they do not speak the language, where they are hated, but they are doing so to find a better life for their children, those people are risk takers. And so the janitors of Los Angeles rebirthed SEIU through the Justice for Janitors movement and campaign, and it spread from there elsewhere, and the union was revived through the heroism of workers who lived in the shadows and who decided to say, I'm not going to be in the shadows anymore. And so if there's any solace I take in what happened last Friday and over the weekend, it's that of all the locals in all the states that they picked a fight with SEIU USWW, it gives me some hope. Because Los Angeles is a city that is used to seeing immigrants not stand in the shadows anymore because they have declared themselves essential because they are to the workings of that city. And And because now at this point, generations in, the Latino communities are very mixed. And so very families have people who are some who are citizens, some who are not, et cetera. And and that's why people are standing up in Los Angeles, because try to think of Los Angeles without the culture of Mexican people. The food, the neighborhoods, right?
The signs are half Spanish there. You know what I mean? It's so stupid.
Right.
Just like this headline going into art, like self-defeating.
And so like, the other thing, the reason that this has been so hard is because scholars of authoritarianism tell us, and we understand and we know this from country after country, from Poland with Lech Walesa, that the labor movement is key to undoing authoritarianism where it has taken hold. And because of that, it is the reason why authoritarians on their rise, one of the first things they do is take on the labor movement. So part of what's been hard is seeing National Guard deployed immediately, seeing Marines deployed. I think the people who listen to this podcast understand this, but in case you don't, like, the United States military is forbidden from doing policing work within the borders of the United States, with the exception if there is an insurrection, and the Insurrection Act of early 19th century, 1806, something like that, I want to say, is invoked. And there's a good reason for that. My father fought for this country in Vietnam. He fought on behalf of this country in Vietnam. He was sent there by U.S. presidents for whom he could not vote because Puerto Ricans cannot vote on the island. And since World War I, Puerto Ricans have participated at very high rates. More Puerto Ricans died per capita in Vietnam than any state in the Union. My father, like many, many, many Latino immigrants, Latinos who are citizens, and like many people of color, joined the military because it's a path out of poverty. And so to see the administration just take this opportunity, because let's just be real. We know, like, what is happening. They are calling this is an insurrection now because they want to justify using the Insurrection Act. And when that happens, my friends, that is martial law. That is the tanks that were on Lake Street last week for an immigration raid. For it was a warrant, but ICE came along to try to catch people on the street. We'll be seeing tanks rolling down neighborhoods everywhere, because Donald Trump's promise of deporting 1 million people in his first year cannot happen without those tactics. They cannot. So when Los Angeles is rising up because ICE is just entering neighborhoods like this, because ICE is just picking up people at Home Depot, this is not the violent criminals that they promised to focus on. But it literally cannot happen. You cannot deport 11 million people. You certainly can't deport them with due process in a short period of time. This is why we need to fix the laws, because it's a mess. And the way to fix this is to fix the laws. Because otherwise, to implement what they want to do, you cannot do it without the United States losing its fundamental character as a democracy. And here we are. So the same week that this weekend, Donald Trump is going to throw himself a birthday party by having the U.S. military roll tanks down Washington, D.C. streets to celebrate him as if he's some tin pot dictator. The military will be there. The military will be in Los Angeles. The military, he threatened today, said, like, if there are protests, if these protests continue, this will happen elsewhere. Again, what they're objecting to is protest. Not violent protest, just protest, period. And where there is violence, that should absolutely, of course, be stopped. But people have the right to protest. People died in this country for the right to protest. But here we are.
What? Just to speak to the people who, I think of like Republican, like kind of moderate Republicans and stuff like that, who might just hide behind, well, it's the law kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Has there ever been a good study into the economics of this action? Because, first of all, my understanding is we need population, to grow as an economy and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that's weird in the first place. But just all this money we're spending, all this chaos that they're causing to do this, for what? Like what is the benefit economic, if you look at it in that way? Yeah.
Well, so right now, they've said that the operation in California in Los Angeles is costing taxpayers $134 million.
Holy shit. And it's going to be more. Clearly.
Oh, yeah. Just keep multiplying that. Back in 2010, I want to say there was an immigration group, a think tank that released a study that analyzed, that tried to figure out, like, how much would it cost to deport 11 million people? Like, what would it take? And so they, put together, right, you think of all the things you would need to do, the kind of enforcement, all that stuff. And what that analysis showed was that the cost of it would be larger than all other law enforcement agencies, federal law enforcement agencies combined.
Yeah.
Because you can't do this
that's all I think of when I watch this stuff, is just go like, why aren't they... We should be attacking them on the money, if nothing else, just because it's insane.
It is insane.
And especially the business owners themselves don't want them gone.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine they're doing this in Oklahoma or in the cities of Republican control, are they?
So that is the speculation. So because I now have a national job now, I have heard this speculation in southern states because some of some people I know who work in immigrant rights have said that they were braced for a lot worse, but they're in red states. So they are not, as of yet, seeing it. I don't think they can't meet their goals. They've set a goal. They've set a quota for ICE of 6,000 detentions a day.
Holy shit.
In the country. So I don't think they'll be able to do that. But then you will see, I think like industries, I would hope you will see industries speak up. Or we're going to have to speak up for them. We're going to have to point out the agriculture industry, the hospitality industry, the landscaping industry. You think in Minnesota, because we're far from the border, it doesn't impact you? Like, check the food.
We got to be one of the next on the list with the walls connection and all that stuff with Trump. I can see that.
Exactly. Yep. That's, I think, what happened last week on Lake Street. So Lake Street, they were serving a warrant, and what's going to become increasingly difficult to suss out in these things is that from my understanding and the best understanding of people I know who like people involved in what happened in Lake Street last week, is that there was a warrant for someone, but they showed up with dozens of ICE agents as well. Why? Because they were going to do exactly what they did in Los Angeles, would just pick people up off the street. And when you pick people up off the street, just to be clear, how are they doing that? By looking at people and saying, does he look illegal? And asking them for papers. ICE in California they recently announced with a lot of fanfare that they had detained 2 people because they were legal immigrants. They had green cards, but you know why they detained them? Because they didn't have their green cards on them when they asked for them. It is not a legal requirement to keep your green card on you at all times. And if the echoes of carrying papers or having on you always something that identifies you as different, if you don't know what that echo is of, maybe read some history books.
It's horrifying. It's nothing. It doesn't sound anything like freedom, right?
Yeah.
And you just can't believe that I don't know. It's hard for me to believe. I'd love to hear from actual like moderate Republicans and stuff to see if anyone would be brave enough to actually be honest about how they feel with this, because it's just I don't know. It's hideous. And
and you see what you are seeing is the head of the border czar threatened to arrest Gavin Newsom.
Oh yeah, I got that right here. Or whatever.
Come and get me. Gavin Newsom tweeted, come and get me. I don't give a damn. Come and get me, tough guy.
What did he actually say first? That made the border czar go after him.
It's just because very important here. National Guards report to the governor of the state.
Oh.
There is a process, and the state of California is suing because there is a process to be followed for the federal government to nationalize National Guard. It last happened during the Rodney King riots in, I think that was 92, 93. But it happened with the cooperation, collaboration, and request of the governor of California at the time. What he did was overrule Donald Trump just commandeered California's National Guard. This way, again, when the national, people, it has arrived. If you feared it coming, it has arrived. The President of the United States overruled the governor, overruled the duly elected mayor of the second largest city in the country, and is sending in National Guard. If you talk to folks in LA, like what the National Guard's doing, they're guarding a building. They're not even, and they're sleeping in halls because they can't find hotels for them. They have nothing for them to actually do. This is all theater. It's all theater. And so when the Speaker of the House says that the governor of California should be tarred and feathered, we have crossed the Rubicon.
If Trump's wearing a military outfit at his parade, I'm out of here. I'm fucking out of here. If he's got a little green, whatever.
Yeah, it's
wearing Gaddafi's old shit.
Yeah. So he's throwing himself a party.
Which I should look it up. But yeah, first, we don't do, just in case anyone doesn't know, we don't do military parades here anymore.
No.
I
think the last time there was you do it when you win a war. We're not at war. But look, today was just me, and these are obviously my opinions. we're playing with the format. Some of you who listen might think that I am wrong about everything today, and that's fine. That is your opinion. I'm happy to debate you at any point or debate anyone on this. But I created this podcast. I get to say what I want.
You get to be a little snotty bitch today.
I get to be a little snotty bitch and commandeer like it's the National Guard. Actually, they all knew they knew I was doing this. The other folks, but for those interested, at the same time as the parade in Washington is happening across the country, we have no Kings rallies. There's one at the Capitol in St. Paul. There are others all across the state of Minnesota and across the country. If you want to raise your voice, and very, very important here, the principles here are of small d democracy. If you're horrified by the prospect of the U.S. military being trained on U.S. citizens and residents, that's right around the corner.
Do you want to live in a country with fucking tanks? You know, like when you go to Mexico, oh, that's so amusing.
Right.
Right? And here he's bringing it here. I don't know why he's sending him back. He's bringing Mexico here.
Yeah. It is wild.
And economically stupid.
Yep.
And what was his campaign promise actually? Like did he state that he would do this? Or because we talked about that people, to me, I'm like, I don't know that people knew that he'd go in and stir up all of this shit.
Yep.
Right? If he just enforced the law, to me that would be okay.
Yeah. The thing is, and I think a lot of people, Donald Trump in general, there's the thing that someone said in his first term, like take him seriously, but not literally. I think it was, and because he's so hyperbolic, I mean, not like he was literally saying this is what he was going to do, but he's also saying a million things, right? And so people got used to just saying like, oh, he's not really going to do that. He's not really going to do this. I know a guy in St. Paul, Minnesota. I won't say the kind of business he has because it would be identifying, who was a big Trumper. He works in an industry, he's a business owner, that depends on immigrant labor. In fact, he has a house on his property where he houses his workers. And he had them driving around in trucks with Trump signs.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I think he's going to be in for a rude awakening.
And they're not going after the business owners, right? They're like ICE or whatever doesn't.
Nope. They go after the immigrants. They go after the people. That's where they're picking up. They're not putting the owner of those the textile the place where they went in Los Angeles. My understanding, it's sort of a Santee Alley. It's a like low price goods and things. So yeah, and as I was arriving here, I got word that there are immigrant rights groups across the country have received letters from the Department of Homeland Security informing them that they are to fill out a survey, and they were going to be hauled before Congress to investigate them for aiding and abetting illegal immigration. So people who have worked for nonprofits to help immigrants do whatever, and I'm thinking Lutheran. I'm not saying Lutheran Social Services got this letter. I don't know if they have,
right.
But they might soon.
It's just like clearly it's going above and beyond the law, like enforceable laws.
Yeah.
It's just, I hate when people use Nazi comparisons. It's so exhausting, but unfortunately these the parallels are getting a little bit on the nose here.
Yeah, here's the thing. I used to say that was exhausting. Now they're just comparisons.
Right, exactly. Kind of making it hard.
Yeah.
That was one of his first acts. No protests. It was one of Hitler's first acts.
Yep. So yeah, there we are. So, I should probably wrap this up. In other depressing news, RFK got rid of the entire vaccine board. So,
and we'll get to the genocide next week.
We'll get to all kinds of things.
Jesus.
So, but if you listen the whole way, I appreciate it. If you listen the whole way and are rage listening and you like doing that, then throw us a few bucks at patreon.com/wrongabouteverythingpodcast. If you listened all the way because you liked hearing it, and in both cases, if you can afford it, please go to patreon.com/wrongabouteverythingpodcast. And I would, and like I said, open to any and all debate. That's why I created this podcast. Open to any and all disagreement. That's why I created this podcast, because I think that we can come to that. And I said many, many times that the Trump year, that we started this podcast way before Trump. And the Trump years have made it more difficult to do at times, but also feel more important. It feels more important than ever to have a broad Democratic coalition. I don't think that my colleagues here agree with me that we are in a crisis. But on that, I can agree to disagree. I think my point of view will just become overwhelmingly obvious as we move on. So I can wait to be right. I can wait until
snotty little bitch.
Do you remember when Brian after January 6th said the worst thing that Donald Trump did was to make Javier right? Yeah. Well, here we are.
Right again.
So with that, I will sign off. Democratic strategist of Puerto Rican heat and worried for our democracy, Javier Murillo.
And he is?
I am right about everything.
Nothing I can do, guys.